Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the professor, and this is the moment of truth.
But the most important thing I can say is, only in America can somebody who nobody literally heard of 2 weeks ago be on his way to being possibly the vice president of the United States, second to the most powerful person in the world, because he made the argument for himself. He made the case against Donald Trump. He made the case against Republicans in a fresh way. And here we are. This is the most unpredictable race that you've seen, I think, in the past 50 years. It's just nuts.
I don't know about you, but I'm feeling excited about the election. I'm thinking all of a sudden I got to get down to the doggone polls and vote. Oh, what the hell? I want to do early voting. No, let me in right now. I've got to cast my vote right this very moment because this guy who looks like Grandpa from some Pixar movie is apparently going to be Kamala Harris's running mate. Not surprisingly, Kamala chose a much older white guy to be her vice presidential candidate. This is right out of the Obama playbook. Obama also chose an older, gray-headed white guy to be his running mate too, someone who the older white males who are right-of-center conservatives might be able to identify with, someone who they can look at and see themselves. In Walz's, Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, who has been in office since 2018, so what that means is he was the governor when George Floyd was murdered. There's some phony whining about whether he should have deployed the National Guard sooner to suppress the uprisings that took place in his state in 2020, but nobody's asking what he's done before or since 2020 to punish the police, who were the ones responsible for the social unrest in the first place. Because since the murder of George Floyd, the Minnesota police have been busy still killing black citizens, such as Dante Clark, who was murdered in 2021 by Kim Potter. She went to prison for that one. Amir Locke, who was killed when police raided his apartment with a no-knock warrant in 2022, and then Ricky Cobb II in 2023, and others. So Tim Walz was ready to bring in the army to stop citizens from exercising their right to demand a redress of grievances. But when it comes time to rein in the thugs in blue, the criminals who actually caused the public unrest in the first place, he's done nothing. Gee, sounds like Joe Biden now, doesn't it? Tim Walz is part of the problem, but then again, he would have to be. That's how he was allowed to become governor, and that's why Kamala Harris chose him to be her running mate, or at the very least, that's the reason why he wouldn't be ruled out. There were always going to be phony orgasms about whoever she chose, mainly because elections are great for ratings, but in this case, there's all kind of extras being slopped on this one. Because the white left's real strategy here is to convince their voters that they're happy and thrilled for this guy, even though no one can tell you what you're voting for or why you should be happy in the first place. Nobody knows who this guy is. How do you get happy about a guy who literally you didn't even know his name until this morning? And there's been the usual speculation about why this guy in particular. Minnesota is a state that Democrats have been able to carry, so it's not a battleground state. Usually that's why you choose a vice president, because that candidate can get you votes that you normally can't get on your own. That's the reason why I was telling you that Kamala Harris was being instructed by the white media that she needed to choose a Democrat who came from a battleground state. At the very least, it would take one of those states out of contention so that Trump couldn't get it. Or at the very least, it would reduce the chances that he could get it. Keep in mind, as I've always said, the white media communicates with white supremacy within itself through the white media. That's how it communicates internally. That's the reason why you had that orgy of white media coverage saying that Kamala Harris needed to choose Josh Shapiro, governor of Pennsylvania, or at the very least, she needed to appoint Katie Hobbs as her running mate because she's the governor of Arizona, and that would make it where at least those states would be out of contention. That's the reason why you had all of that white media hype and cheerleading for Josh Shapiro. Shapiro was clearly the overwhelming favorite of the left corner of the white media and definitely of the Democratic donor class. But as we just got through talking about just last week, Shapiro has a lot of baggage of his own. And while his support for Israel would be a damper for young Democratic voters, it's the scandal about him paying money to get rid of his sexual harassment problem for one of his staffers that was probably the real reason that Kamala Harris looked and said, nah, this guy would be too much of a problem on the campaign trail. Kamala Harris's strategy is to attack Trump as being anti-woman. That is, on abortion and other things. The strategy is to appeal to white suburban women, tell them what a creep Donald Trump is, and you need somebody who's a woman, somebody who understands your issues. They hope that they can get votes from those people, even though normally those women don't vote Democratic to begin with. And I would imagine that has more than anything to do with why Josh Shapiro ultimately didn't get the golden nod, because it was decided that he would simply contrast and contradict too much Kamala Harris's own little strategy. And let's face it, this woman can't walk and chew bubblegum at the same time, so there's no way in the world she would be able to dance through a landmine of accusations and innuendo about her running mate and how contradictory it is to have him on the ticket, considering some of the things he's done vis-a-vis women in the last few years. Tim Walz is being automatically praised by the likes of Van Jones, predictably, but nobody can tell you what's so great about the man. They just say that he takes shots at J.D. Vance, and while I can certainly appreciate making that racist hayseed come in for some abuse, the problem is that's about the only thing that Tim Walz has done. Yes, Walz doesn't have that much that you can attack about the man. I guess Kamala Harris or her handlers felt that politically speaking, he wouldn't be a lightning rod for controversy. But then again, neither was Geraldine Ferraro, or Lloyd Benson, or Joe Lieberman, or Tim Kaine. And how much good did they do for their particular presidential races? At some point, your vice presidential running mate has to bring some name recognition to the table. Otherwise, they're more of a sitting mate than a running mate. The main headlines I've seen about Tim Walz are white media articles entitled, "Who is Tim Walz?" And if you want any further proof of how anonymous and nondescript this guy is, even the Minneapolis Star-Tribune ran a headline asking, "Who is Tim Walz?" This is the governor of the state that the Minneapolis Star-Tribune is in. And even they feel like they need to explain to their readers who their own governor is. They gotta tell the readers in their own state, this is who your governor is, kids, and this is why you should like him. And I think that pretty much sums up the problem right there. It's not that people aren't all that familiar with the man. The problem is people don't know him from a can of paint. It's one thing to have J.D. Vance on TV running his ignorant mouth. Even if people can't readily remember the name, they at least know the face and that he's got something to do with the Senate, perhaps. But it's different to have somebody who might as well have come down with the last drop of rain. And where black voters are concerned, at best, Tim Walz might as well have come from Mars. This man has really not done anything that black voters can point to and say, this guy is on our side, he's been a big help to us, and we're excited about supporting him. So how exactly does this guy help her campaign, white media hype aside? Now, since we only have heard about this guy for about the last 12 to 16 hours or so, I guess the message that they want us to think that he's putting out there is basically more of the Democrats, hey, the adults are in charge. Walz himself is calling Trump and J.D. Vance weirdos. So this is them appealing to the voters' sense of normalcy, that Harris and Walz represent normality, that they're boring, i.e. sensible government, whereas Trump and Vance are the candidates of chaos and the deplorables. Okay, that's fine, but people don't vote based on who is normal. And truth be told, as Bill Clinton said, people will vote for strong and wrong before they vote for weak and right. Trying to appeal to people on the basis of being normal or otherwise we're just commonplace government, that could be very easily seen as weak, whereas Trump and his pals could try to brand themselves as we're the radicals, we're the disruptors, we're going to change things. Which for a lot of voters is a message that will appeal to them because they do think that things need to be different, even if they can't necessarily define what different is. So the message of the adults are in charge or we're the candidates of normal, that's not what galvanizes people and motivates them to the polls. The main thing that people vote on is pocketbook issues, and in that regard, Kamala's fighting an uphill battle. On paper, Joe Biden may be doing better at handling the economy, or at least that's what we're told, but the perception is that prices were lower, or at least they weren't as difficult to buy groceries during the Trump years as it is now. And even though that may be a false perception, in politics, perception is reality. If you're perceived by the voters as doing a poor job, then don't expect to have one for very long. And speaking of politicians who have suddenly found themselves returned back to the private sector, Cori Bush is now the latest black member of Congress to fall victim to AIPAC. And predictably, none of the Democrats seem to be raising any hell about that. None of them are saying, wait a minute here, you can't be targeting all of these black politicians. No, they're fine with it. And that should tell all of you shills, you bootlicks, you agents, and you plants in my comments section, this is the problem with the Democrats that you guys won't talk about. You got AIPAC selectively singling out black politicians to take them down, and you don't see Joe Biden saying boo about it, and you don't see Kamala Harris saying anything about it either. Now, what's wrong with this picture? Oh, but this is the party who stands by black people, and they're all for representation. Yeah, as long as that representation follows orders and does what they're told. But the real author of Cori Bush's political demise was, well, Cori Bush. From before she got into office, she was busy parroting the standard Democratic line. Mostly about immigration, abortion, gun control. Those were the things that she was prioritizing. The pet issues of the white left. Because, like so many other black politicians, she figured once she got that pat on the head, she was in good, and that she figured she had it all sewn up. But that only goes as long as you don't even so much as speak out of turn, which is exactly what she did. Now, her district was supposed to be her home turf. How the hell did she lose it? Because like most of these wannabe talented 10th types, Cori Bush focused mostly on herself. She got into office and then forgot all about her home district. She's out of touch with the very people in her area that she needed, and it's been this way for a while now. It was obvious. That's why AIPAC targeted her. When you're a politician, you're supposed to have the pulse of your voters. That's your actual job. But most politicians are lazy, especially if they're bootlicks, so they just count on the power of incumbency to keep them in office. And they figure since most of the time folks are simply disinterested in running for office, that guarantees that they'll never have any substantive challengers. But all it took was a group who have both organization and an interest in taking her office from her, and they just walked up and pushed her out of her seat. The cost of being out of touch is that you'll also wind up out of office. If you've done what you're supposed to, and you keep faith with the voters, and you make sure that you got your finger to the pulse, when AIPAC tries to manufacture a challenger, that person will be rejected as the puppet they are. But on the other hand, if you decide to leave this huge vacuum where your public support is supposed to be, well, you just might find some scumbag that you never heard of being propped up by a bunch of outer-towners, and he'll be the one who wins the race. It won't be by a landslide, but it doesn't have to be. It'll still be more votes than you can get. There's no reason why Cori Bush could not have held on to her seat, but she decided that she had better things to do than that, and now she can go ahead and pursue those better things full time. But one has to wonder if perhaps the inverse is going to happen to Kamala Harris in November, because she's also decided to ignore her base, lost faith with the people who put her into office. Though in this case, the very people who put Cori Bush out in the streets, they're the ones giving tons of money to Kamala Harris. And they're the ones who apparently they're hoping can manufacture some sort of excitement for her candidacy. And they're hoping that tons of money are going to make up for how she's totally ignored her base and the lack of enthusiasm. They hope that with enough cash being thrown into the race, they'll be able to fabricate a voter coalition comprised in many cases of the people who wouldn't vote for Kamala Harris and Biden in the first place. Well, her mountain of money won't cover up her mountain of deficiencies. So if the powers that be are desperately hoping that I am going to get excited about Tim Walz being Kamala's running mate, they got another thing coming. Even if you're one of the people who decides you want to jump on the hype train because, well, there's a little bit of buzz about it through the white media, you can't ignore the fact that where black voters are concerned, that train is still heading off a cliff. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Chevalier Foster, Jacques Hargett, Nikki Beach, Morris Bodden, and Mike Hughes. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.